Tell us about your thoughts on the budget on Wednesday. What should Jeremy Hunt do, Jack, to, well, I mean, he's not going to turn around these polls that have been consistent for 2 years now. The Conservatives haven't been ahead in a single poll in that length of time. But tell me what you think he can do to maybe claw things back a little bit for the Conservatives.
Yeah, well, I think he needs to do something much more radical than he plans to do. According to the papers today, we know the fiscal headroom that the OBR have given him.
It's the Office of Budget Responsibility, so they kind of mark the Treasury's homework, don't they?
Yeah, so the spare money that the government has left over for tax cuts. But that amount has reduced dramatically over the past few months from about £30 billion to £13 billion. As a consequence of that, Hunt is now radically scaling back his tax cut plans, and it looks like he's just going to cut national insurance and the obligatory freeze to fuel duty. I think we need
we're talking about income tax as well. I mean, he cut national insurance the last time.
We are talking about income tax, but it
yeah.
looks like, I mean, it seems like they haven't quite decided yet, and I know, I think Sunak and Hunt are planning to meet tonight.
Yeah, they're meeting tonight to sign it all off, apparently.
To sign it off, but it looks like the income tax cut is less likely than it was a few months ago.
Would that make a difference, Lucy, if Jeremy Hunt cut income tax by 2%? I mean, I've seen loads of polls of people saying that they're fine with high taxes. Who are these people?
Who are these people? But the problem is that there are different cohorts of the electorate, and the grey voter, you might say, the people who usually are most reliable at getting out to vote, they're very concerned that actually it might be just a national insurance cut, because that obviously doesn't affect them at all. They're not working.
They don't pay national insurance on their pensions. Yeah.
And then there are some other things that could be done. So, for example, there has been talk about inheritance tax, but that affects so few people that I can't see that he would do that.
But the principle of inheritance tax is something Rishi Sunak's been thinking about for a long time.
But something like stamp duty would affect many more people and would really go some way to freeing up some kind of movement in the housing market, for example. And I wouldn't do everything. What we really need to do is to build more homes. So another thing that Jeremy Hunt could do is he could actually try and introduce some policies that would free that up and make it more tax efficient for councils to actually say, yeah, we're actually going to allow the house builders to use the land that's waiting to be used. Yeah. But the problem is that, as everybody will often say, it has never been the case that a party has come from behind on both leadership but also economic competence, and that's why I think Jeremy Hunt used those two words today about being prudent and responsible.
And he said that people trusted the Conservatives. They don't trust the Conservatives on the economy.
Not. But unfortunately, the economy is the only game in town when it comes to the next election. So many of the other topics that we'll talk about today, whether it is immigration, whether it is hate speech, actually for every single voter of whatever persuasion, whatever faith, they actually really worry about the pound in their pocket.
It's always the number one issue. Jack, I mean, Lucy makes some really good points there. For young people, of which you're one, getting on the housing ladder, turning generation rent into generation buy, is what the Conservatives keep talking about. They've talked about it for years. Michael Gove talked about it a few weeks ago, but it's never happened, has it?
No, it hasn't. And really the only thing we can do to solve the housing crisis is to build more homes. We know that there's a big mismatch between supply and demand. That's the only way you can solve the problem.
And immigration comes into that as well, doesn't it? If you have a lot more people coming into the country, they need somewhere to live.
Yeah, if you're not going to increase the supply of homes as well, then absolutely immigration does become a problem at that point. I think also, you know, you talk about the grey votes. I think looking at the triple lock would be a great way to make savings.
Good luck to any.
Well, yeah.
I totally agree with you. I think the triple lock is something that needs to be examined. But at the same time, show me a Chancellor in an election year who's even got to talk about changing the triple lock to pensions.
Well, it takes political bravery, doesn't it? But we know that if the state pension had been linked to wages instead of the triple lock measure, it would be costing about £6 billion a year less than it does at the moment. And these are the types of savings that Jeremy Hunt's looking for in other places at the moment.
And also, if you're trying to actually broaden your appeal across the electorate, only focusing on policies that are for the over 65s, those people are going to maybe die before the next election.
Yeah.
So actually what you should be focusing is focusing on things for the younger voter.
Jeremy Hunt was talking this morning about Rishi Sunak's speech on Friday, where he kept talking about unity. We need unity as a nation. We need to all see as one. I mean, surely there are always winners and losers in every budget. That always happens, but everyone looks at it and says, what's in it for me? We see these little calculators online where you can see, am I better off or worse off as a result of the budget? But I mean, it's very difficult to have something for everybody in any budget, isn't it, Lisa?
But at the moment, I think there's a whole generation of people, anyone under 30 could reasonably say, for the last 14 years, you haven't done anything for us.
Do you think
what
that's
have
true?
you actually
Jack,
done for us?
Are you under 30?
Yes, I am.
Do you think anything good has happened for you from the economic perspective in the last 14 years?
I don't think so particularly. I think spending has massively increased on health, spending's massively increased on pensions, whilst it hasn't on education, it hasn't, we haven't invested in infrastructure, we haven't invested in housing. So I think things have got dramatically worse for working people. You look at the polling at the moment, it really is only the over 65s who are currently supporting the Conservatives. So actually, if they want any hope of doing okay in the general election, then they do need to broaden their appeal, as you say. And I think also, we've heard a lot about tax cuts this week, about the need for tax cuts. Actually, it needs to be more granular than that. We need to say, how are we going to cut taxes? And actually our tax system at the moment, it's almost anti-aspiration in terms of we have all these thresholds and all these kind of measures by which benefits are withdrawn, for example, child benefits, that discourage people from earning more money, because once you earn more than £50,000, or once a parent earns more than £50,000 within a household, then that child benefit is withdrawn. And that disincentivises people earning more. And that's not the kind of behaviour we want to be incentivising if we want to be encouraging growth.
Teresa Humphrey has been in touch on WhatsApp. She says all Jeremy Hunt needs to do is move the tax threshold, and that will give people a tax cut. People who don't pay tax in the past pay tax now because wages have risen and has put them into paying tax. It's not rocket science. I mean, that's a fair point, Lucy Beresford, isn't it?
It is a very fair point, but the problem with that is that it's not very visible. And at the moment, what the government needs to be seen to be doing things that are very visible and that will make people feel
but more money
wealthy
in your pocket. I mean, that's fairly, if you're moved out of a tax bracket.
But it's really funny how all of that is absolutely accurate and true. It's just that that's not how the voter experiences it, and it's the way, and that's why things budgets are normally about headline things like, have they taken money off fuel? Have they put money on beer and cigarettes?
Yes.
It's really basic economics. Whereas absolutely, from a economic point of view, that's what fiscal drag does, and if you could eliminate fiscal drag, that would be brilliant. But it's not how the voter experiences the improvement in their wealth, and they would very unlikely to give credit to a government that did that. That's the kind of thing that you could do in a midterm budget. But in a pre-election year, and this is frankly the only event between now and when the next general election is, that the government has got any attempt to move the dial on this really shocking polling, and therefore it's got to be visible rabbits out of hats as opposed to...
Lots of pressure for them. Well, what do you think about what Lucy and Jack and I have been saying? You can let us know, 0344 499 1000. You can give us a call. You can also WhatsApp on that number, 0344 499 1000. You can text me on 87222 with the word talk in your text. Just put the word talk in your text so it comes up on the screen in front of me. Don't know what happens if you don't. I don't know where else it goes, maybe Times Radio or something. Then you can also tweet me at talkTV and at Peter Cardwell. I'll try to look at those in breaks as well. Let me just give you a few perspectives on this. Dan has been in touch. He says, "Morning, Peter. I get really tired when people such as Lucy say inheritance tax doesn't matter because it doesn't affect enough people. The fact is, it's just a shocking tax and should go. Taxing someone's wealth on their death is just a disgusting thing to do. This would cause riots in many countries if they tried to bring this in." So, cheers, Dan. Lucy?
I completely agree with that sentiment. For me, it's very perverse that it's the only tax that you pay because you're grieving. That is the only reason it comes into being. The problem for a government is how many people are going to pay it, and is it worth all of the ballyhoo in order to sweeten the pill for maybe 0.4% of the population? And the answer is it isn't.
Although so it's the principle is something that people often think about.
I think the principle, and also there are going to be so few people who will ever pay it that it doesn't really matter to them. But as you say, it's the fact that they think, but it could be me. Imagine if I, for some bizarre reason, did inherit from some long-lost relative that I didn't even know I had. It would be really offensive to think that I would have to pay so. And as I say, it happens when you're grieving. There's nothing more distasteful. But the problem is that it doesn't, when you're trying to find, as I say, budgets are about theatre, they're about performance, they're about what eye-catching things can you say that will grab people's attention, and being able to say we've wasted this amount of money, it just doesn't really help the government going forward.
Jack, statistically, you're one of the three of us who is furthest from death, unless I obviously get hit by a number 72 bus on the way home. What do you think about inheritance tax?
I think I agree that in principle it's wrong, but I think it's just so low down the list of priorities right now of taxes that we should cut. You look back to the budget or the autumn statement last year, that was actually the biggest tax-cutting fiscal event, I think, since Nigel Lawson's Big Bang in 1988, and it hasn't had that much cut through because it is about the theatre, and it's also about people actually feeling it in their pockets. And so I think if the government were to push through plans to abolish inheritance tax or reduce it, sure, they might win some support in the short term because people are opposed to it in moral terms, but actually the real effect is really minimal. We really need to be looking at these thresholds and looking at these taper rates.
Okay. Well, that's actually a point that one of our callers wants to make in a second. We're going to bring David in just a minute. But let me read what Barry says. He says, so the over 65s have paid their way and deserve a good pension, and I doubt if a lot of them will be dead before the next election unless there's a nuclear strike. Stop thinking the world owes you a living, says Barry. Anna says, morning, Peter. Can I just remind your panel that people of a certain age have paid tax their whole life? That tax has funded the country for the younger generations growing up in an easier time growing up than perhaps the older generation had. Yet they look at them and they want them to continue to pay and give everything they have to benefit the young. Working hard your whole life clearly does not make your elder years easier. Brian says one size-fits-all solution is cancel the con of recent years, unfreeze the tax threshold and increase it to 15k now. This will bring the lowest earners out of paying taxes and encourage more people to work instead of drawing benefits. Well, let's talk to David in Glasgow. He's given us a ring on 0344 499 1000. You can do the same thing. David, what point would you like to make? You're very welcome to the programme this morning. I'm here with Lucy and with Jack.
Yeah, good morning, Peter and Lucy and Jack as well. Hope you're all well. Yes,
all very well. Thanks, David. What would you like to say?
Yeah, Scotland made a progressive move, I think. I mean, it was criticised at the time, and I think it's landed quite well, in that we introduced this 19% so-called starter rate of tax. Anybody up to, I think it's 14,732 paid 19%. Now, it's not a vast difference to the 20%, but what it seems to do for me is it signals a kind of progressive movement. You know, that people that are earning the less pay less.
And we do have this different system, you say, in Scotland. I mean, this is something that Jeremy Hunt will no doubt be looking at, Jack. What do you make of what David's saying there?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting idea. I think we really do need to be looking at these rates. We really do need to be looking at kind of how the tax system works, as well as kind of how high the tax burden is, because just alone the tax burden being low or high doesn't really tell us much. It's about where that burden falls and it encouraging growth and aspiration.
It's interesting also, David, from the taxpayer's perspective in England, where they are, because of Barnett formula and because of the way it all works. I mean, Scottish people are more subsidised than other parts of the UK, including Northern Ireland and Wales. You have the Scottish government, of course, has tax varying powers, but do you think it's fair that different taxpayers in different parts of the UK subsidise others, David?
No, I mean, I think this is this whole question, Peter. I mean, I'll just pose a question rather than any comment. Do we start to need to look at things like council tax? Do we start to need to look at, for instance, people that are, let's say, over the age of 70 paying zero tax? You know, these are the questions that we need to answer in this country. Where do we start to get the formula right, you know?
Well, David, thank you very, very much indeed for your thoughts on that. Let me put them to Lucy Beresford. What do you make of what David in Glasgow said there, Lucy?
I think it's really interesting because I think the biggest problem is how complicated our tax system really is. That actually, if you could simplify the rates, and that would go not just for personal taxation but also for corporation tax, you want to, if you're trying to encourage growth across all areas of economic output, whether that's from an individual level or maybe from a corporate level, you've got to actually simplify and lower the tax rate, lower the tax burden for everybody. But the problem is, certainly over the last 2 years, the tax burden has massively increased.
Oh, we've got the highest taxation as a proportion of what the country earned since World War II. It is, David in Scotland, another David, has been in touch to say, coming from Scotland, I'm now politically homeless. Normally I would vote Labour, but now I think the Tories and they're no different and will not make any difference to the state of the economy. The SNP are too obsessed with independence and have regressed Scotland in the last 17 years. So it's interesting how people in different parts of the UK, obviously some of what Jeremy Hunt is saying will affect every single person in the UK. Some of what he says will only affect people in England, because, for example, if he's talking about the health budget and so on, so it can be difficult to decode that.
difficult to decode it, but not impossible. And that is arguably what they've been put into that role to do, that actually there needs to be a nimbleness to this particular fiscal event, which I don't see any sign of that happening at all. Even though they don't have the same headroom that they thought they were going to have even a couple of months ago, there are these really straightforward things they could do in terms of just simplifying the tax system that would make it actually... It would tap into what Jack was talking about in terms of the aspiration, that actually people don't mind paying tax. They recognise that as part of their civic duty, but they want to feel that the system is fair.
Absolutely.
And when it comes to the polling, when it comes to polling day, and people go into the voting booth, they really want to feel: has this government been fair to me? Fair to me and fair to my family. And
what do you think, Jack? Has this government been fair to you, fair to your family?
No, I don't think so.
Why not?
Not fair to me. Well, I mean, they've trebled tuition fees. They've education has been down prioritised. When compared to health, the tax burden on working people is at a record high. They haven't built houses. That's the biggest thing of all, I think, is the issue of planning. And I think that's why, someone like myself, who would, broadly consider myself on the centre right, but actually leaning towards Labour, because I think the issue of planning reform is so big that only by doing that can we actually unlock the growth potential of this country.
So that's fascinating. How old are you, Jack?
I'm 23.
You're 23. You're saying you're on the centre right, but you're thinking you could vote Labour.
Yeah, and I voted Conservative the last election. But planning reform is just so important. Labour is finally saying the things that need to be said and promising the policies that need to be implemented in terms of building on the green belt, in terms of actually taking councils to task when they don't build enough homes, saying that they're going to bring back mandatory housing targets. All of that's really important. I think even if they fail on all of the other stuff, and I think they will fail on a lot of the other stuff, because I think a lot of their other policies are quite unimpressive and confused. But if they get that right, that is such a big deal. And it's such a shame that the Conservatives haven't solved this problem over the last 14 years, because it should be the party of the centre-right.
A lot of people are feeling politically homeless. Maybe you're one of them. Maybe you want to talk to Jack and Lucy and tell them why. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Paul in York has done exactly that. He wants to talk about pensioners and something Lucy said. Paul, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Good morning, Peter.
Good morning.
I'd just like to take issue with Lucy. She mentioned that a lot of the pensioners will be dead by the...
I think that was a throwaway comment. That was a bit of a flippant comment, Lucy, wasn't it?
Well, not least because it'll probably be within the next 4 years. But the sentiment is about what section of the universe of the electorate are you targeting? And to target people who are older, who are almost by definition more likely to vote, you're pushing at an open door. The key is to try to target people who aren't necessarily going to vote for you. There's a whole section of don't knows. All of the polling suggests that there's a really large section of people out there who don't think that it's Labour for them necessarily. Labour haven't sealed the deal.
Is Lucy apologising to us pensioners for that?
Sorry, am I apologising?
For making the comment that I feel pensioners will be dead by the next general election.
Well, I think it is literally the case that there will be some people who are voting in the next 12 months who are not going to be around.
I'm sure Lucy
in the next 4 years.
Didn't mean to offend anybody, Paul.
And I speak as someone who's nearly close to that age myself.
How do you feel about
I'm a pensioner myself, and I keep myself active and healthy, and I hope I'm around for about the next general election and the election after that.
And many more after that as well, Paul. Thank you for your call.
Yes,
sorry, go ahead.
But who will you vote for, Paul? Who will you vote for?
I will be voting Conservative, because they tend to look after pensioners. They look after the triple lock at the moment. And this is why I wanted to mention to Jack, pensioners can't go out and earn an extra bit of living when they can't get out and about naturally through their health. Yet you want to take the triple lock away from us.
Jack?
Well, I think what we either need to do is take the triple lock away and link pensions to wages and prices, because you can't end up in a situation where wages are stagnating for workers, but pensioners, who are one of the largest groups in society, are entirely insulated from the overall conditions of the economy. Or you need to means test the state pension, because absolutely, I think if you're, a pensioner who's, who can't afford the basics in life, who is struggling, then you absolutely deserve government support. But the reality is, 1/4 of pensioners are millionaires. pensioners are much more likely to own their own homes than other generations. So I don't think it's fair that we have this benefit, essentially, that is paid out to all pensioners, regardless of their status of wealth.
When I started work at the age of 15 and a half, my contract with the government was I would be paying national insurance towards my pension for when I grow older. It's not a benefit. It's something I've been paying for since I was 15 and a half.
Paul, we've had a text here from Mary in County Down. She says the argument that older people should have favourable treatment on tax because they've paid tax and national insurance for their whole lives is flawed. The middle-aged and older generation enjoyed lower house prices and free university education. Young people are now starting their adult lives and careers with little or no prospect of buying a home, sky-high rent, massive student debt. I don't mean the older poor, I mean the doing very nicely, thank you class.
No, I mean, yes, okay, I'll take that argument to a proportion, but I started off married life with next to nothing in my pocket, worked hard all my life, never been unemployed, paid my national insurance every week on my wages, and just expect at the end of my working life the pension I've been paying all my life for.
I think that's a fair point. A lot of people will feel the same way.